Well, we're probably not missing each other as much as we will in a little bit of time. I've been told that sometimes people who are grieving but have not lived near the person who passes sometimes don't feel the loss until about the time that they would have visited them the next time in their life. And so we haven't been apart for very long yet, but pretty soon we will be, and we'll be feeling that. But the whole point of this is that we're trying to remind ourselves that we are still together in spirit. So I'm just going to go on and pretend that I'm used to doing this with a camera, although, believe it or not, this is really the first time I've done it. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be in Luke chapter 15 this morning. And so we'll just start there with these stories that are actually very familiar. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, I wouldn't want you to think that I really endorse all of what's on Saturday Night Live, but I do like the satire. And one of the satirical segments that they did in some of their earlier editions of Saturday Night Live was a family called the Whiners. And everything they said, even the parents, was a complaint, and it was made in a really whiny voice that I won't attempt to imitate. But I didn't see it all that many times, but I thought that they would have been good for some families to see. Not ours, of course. We never had any whiners in our family, then or now. But in Jesus' day, the Pharisees would have been a good subject of a similar satirical segment. As they responded to Jesus, we often find them muttering. And so we could have called them the mutterers. And Luke is the only writer who actually uses that word, but the attitude that we see in them here in Luke comes through in several situations that are similar in spirit to what we find here in these two verses. So what were they muttering about? What was it that they didn't like here? Why didn't they like it? Well, Jesus reveals that what they're really showing is some misunderstandings in spite of being probably very analytical people as teachers of the law. But he reveals their misunderstandings by telling three stories about lost possessions: a lost coin, a lost sheep, and a lost son. Now, we're just going to look at these stories and let the answers to their problems kind of unfold. The three stories really boil down to two main points. Let's continue in Luke chapter 15. Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." Question: did the shepherd's choice here show some kind of favoritism? Was he showing that he cared more about that one sheep than he did about all 99 of the others that he left back in the fold? Why didn't he concern himself with the wants and needs of the majority? Well, he wasn't showing favoritism. He was showing good business sense. For us, it's touching to see this shepherd treating the little lamb in such a gentle way. But Jesus' original listeners probably didn't quite grasp that figure. What they understood was that a lamb was a valued possession. And any shepherd that had any sense didn't just let his sheep wander off, because before long he wouldn't have any sheep. So as for the 99, it wasn't that he cared less about them. It was just that they were safe. They were probably in their fold after being counted at the end of the day, and that's how he discovered that the one sheep was lost. So if one of those 99 had wandered off, or did wander off the next day, the shepherd would have been out there looking for that one. Now the second story is even shorter. Look at verse 8. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, obviously, a coin represented a lot more than most of our coins do now. This was no trivial loss to the woman. You might guess it was maybe a tenth of all of her savings. Again, there's no indication, however, that the diligent search had anything to do with the value of one coin over another. The lost coin wasn't the most valuable coin in a collection of rare coins. All indications are that each coin had the same value. The only reason that this one was the object of such special efforts was that it was the lost one. The point for us is that God values each of us just as the man who depended on sheep for his living valued each of his sheep, or the woman who was depending on her savings for her security valued each coin that she had managed to save. Now, that doesn't mean that God values us purely for selfish reasons, but it does mean that he takes every loss personally. Anyone he loses is a personal loss. And it isn't like a love affair when you're dumped and everyone tells you that there are other fish in the sea or plenty of heifers in the barnyard or whatever. In Paul Simon's tongue-in-cheek song, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, he is wanting to leave this lover, but he just can't quite bring himself to do it. And that is until another woman tells him, "Just slip out the back, Jack. Make a new plan, Stan. You don't need to be coy, Roy. Just step off the bus, Gus. You don't need to discuss much. Just drop off the key, Lee, and set yourself free." But here's the turning point. But then she kisses me, and I realize she probably was right. There must be 50 ways to leave your lover. See, God doesn't value each of us until someone comes along who can do something better for him. He isn't going to get over losing us by finding someone else. Everyone is his already. There's not even going to be a child born to take your place. You have value that is not relative to anyone else's value. He doesn't love you less because he values others. Now, sometimes people have problems, maybe even going to a church that's a larger church than they've been used to, or even if a church grows, because they feel like they're less valuable because they're not as prominent. But there can be a difference in the way that he treats us or the way that he responds to our presence or loss, but that doesn't mean that he values one person more or less than the other. The lost will receive special attention, and there will be an especially enthusiastic response when they're found. And this is where our third story comes in. Look at what happens. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Now, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him out to his fields to feed pigs. Now he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother came home," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Notice that it's never said that there is no rejoicing over the 99 who don't need to repent, or there's no rejoicing because of the coins that were never lost. And he doesn't say that there is no rejoicing or no love, actually, for the son who never leaves. The real difference is that not God just values us, but that he loves us. And this makes all the difference in the world. Now, as we sometimes use the word love, we might think that there is little difference between valuing and loving someone. But as God defines love, there's a world of difference. To us, love is often conditional. We love someone because of what they do for us or how they make us feel. And that really only indicates that we value them. They have something to offer us, so we take care to maintain the relationship for what we can get out of it. Now, there's nothing wrong with valuing someone or valuing what they have to offer. We need to be valued. Another word is appreciated. But without unconditional love, appreciation is really not such a great thing. There's always pressure to perform. What happens when you don't have the strength to perform because of some problem or some tragedy? Or what happens when you get older or less attractive and you can't perform or ring their bells? See, we need to be valued, but we need love in order to be secure. It is love that ensures that we will always be valued. So this is the way that God loves. And there were three main characters in this story. First of all, the boy who left. He's the one that we most often think of. The story is usually called the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal just means wasteful or arrogant or extravagant, but the Bible doesn't actually call him that. It's just a traditional name. But his problem was not limited to just being foolishly wasteful. He could have stayed home and done that. You know, I've done that from time to time. But what made his wasteful extravagance so damaging was that he chose short-term thrills over what could have provided much more satisfaction and a deeper joy over the longer term. He chose, the revelry of a party over the joy of friendships. He chose the pride of having expensive clothes over the satisfaction of working and really making something better than it was when he began. He chose the high of drugs, in this case alcohol, over the high of being able to really consciously enjoy all of what God had given him. He chose the momentary sexual thrills with prostitutes over the deep oneness and true intimacy of the marriage relationship. Now, everyone has good points, right? But as Jesus told this story, it would be hard to find any good points in this young man. Contrast that with the younger brother, or the older brother. We usually focus on the negative reaction that this older brother had and what that really indicated, but we're overlooking a lot if we do that. This older brother was everything that many a father would say that he wanted his son to be. He was respectful. He didn't demand his share. He was sensible. He didn't choose the life of a party animal. He was loyal. He stuck by his father. He was hardworking and industrious. I mean, where was he when the younger brother returned? He was out in the field. He was considerate. I mean, how do you think that the younger son made the father feel when he left? The older son didn't do that. He was obedient. As he said, he never disobeyed his father's orders. Well, what about the father? Which son was probably more like his father in terms of lifestyle? Do you think that the father approved of the way the younger son had chosen to live? Do you think that when the younger son got ready to take off, his dad said, well, whatever turns you on, son. I mean, you got to go sow your wild oats. If it makes you feel good, do it. I'm sure the older son seemed a lot more like a chip off the old block to those who knew the family. But there was something missing. What was the difference between his reaction to the return of his brother as compared to the reaction of their father when his brother returned? Well, it was love. It was the kind of love that isn't subject to all sorts of ifs. The father loved his son before he left. He loved him after he left and had hurt him deeply. He loved him when he returned. And he didn't take that worldly wise approach that says, I'd better not show too much love or he might take advantage of me. You know, he needs to pay the price. If I just forgive him without slapping a few conditions on him, then he'll just take that as a license to go and do it again. Well, that's the wisdom of the world. The power of love and forgiveness are so strong that what would seem to make sense is not necessary. See, you don't have to hide your feelings. But didn't the father love the older son with the same love? Oh, yeah. He said that. Why didn't this love affect the older son as we should assume that it affected the younger son? It wasn't a difference in the father's attitude toward the sons. It was a difference in their attitudes. What saved the younger son was humility, and what brought the older son down was pride. Everything else seemed to weigh in favor of the older son. But all of those other things put together didn't make him worthy of his father's love. Well, the younger son wasn't worthy either. The difference was only one of them came to realize the truth. Now, in this story, it's easy to see the son who left represented. It was those sinners that the Pharisees and teachers of the law were muttering about. And the older son was obviously a representation of the Pharisees, the upstanding teachers of the law who worked hard at obeying God and being productive servants. Well, they were awfully straight citizens. They did a lot of good work. They just had missed the one quality that was so dominant in their heavenly Father, which was that love without strings attached. To them, life was like a competitive team sport. It was the good people versus the bad people, God's team versus the devil's team. And in their minds, the devil's team, whenever the devil's team scored, heaven would boo and hiss. And anytime the bad people suffered a setback, heaven would cheer. Well, think what that would have meant. That would have meant that whatever was good that happened to the bad people must have been a blessing from Satan, their team leader. And any suffering that the bad people felt was from God. Well, see, Jesus saw things differently. If there were teams, all of humanity, all of mankind was on God's team. Now, Satan and whatever forces he has make up the opposing team. It's not people against people, but Satan against people. Jesus talked about the devil and his angels. Some of us are better players than others on this team, but we're still all on God's team. We're people. When I used to play basketball, I would have to remember not to try to drive into the basket because I was not a good dribbler. And when I forgot that, the other team would love me because they'd know that I was going to benefit their team more than my own. Well, I would, in a sense, become the best player for their team, but I'm not automatically a member of their team every time I do something that benefits them. And that's the way it is on God's team. When we sin, it does benefit Satan's cause. But God doesn't kick us off his team. There are some people who do more for Satan's cause than for God's cause, but there is this unseen team member called grace who guarantees victory. You see, you can't get kicked off of God's team. You can leave the team, or you can refuse to play, but God will always be looking for you to come back and be a part of the winning effort. Remember what he said to the older son? We had to celebrate. We had to celebrate. We should all remember that regardless of the choices that we've made in the past, no matter how we've lived, how we've acted, whether good or bad, we are going to be the ones on the outside, like the older son, unless we give up our pride and at least in our hearts we throw ourselves at our Father's feet and say, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son or your daughter. Just make me like one of your servants. So the question is, where are you at this moment? I mean, whether we have been obedient and hardworking or wasteful and unappreciative, we're not worthy to be called his children. We've failed in the past. We'll fail in the future. We need to be forgiven. We have no right to demand what kind of work he will put us on. We need a servant's heart. We might not be put to prominent work, or we might have to do things that we don't enjoy. That's the life of a servant. But if we're willing to accept that life, our Father is going to treat us as his children, regardless of the job we do. If we've been gone, if we've taken off, when we come back, he's going to put rings on our fingers, robes on our backs, throw a party to rejoice, because each one of us is precious to him, no matter what we've done. I'm the youngest child in my family, as you may remember. Okay, I'm the baby of the family. But my mother gave birth to 7 of us. One died shortly after his birth, but one, the oldest one, Carl Roy, died in an accident when he was 15 years old. I've mentioned this before. It was before I was born, but his loss was an ever-present part of our family. And he lacked only one merit badge, being an Eagle Scout. They awarded that to him posthumously. Well, we had Carl Roy's scout axe, and we used it like any other tool. But once we went camping, and one of my brothers that was just 3 years older than me, he was about 10 at the time, I think, buried that axe in some sand. And then he forgot about that. Well, we got home and we unpacked, and my dad realized, where's Carl's axe? Finally, my brother fessed up. He told Dad what he had done, and we got back in the car. We drove 2.5 hours back to the campground to get the axe. And, you know, I don't really think that we had thought of that axe, even those, you know, who had known and loved Carl Roy when he was living. I don't think they thought of that axe as an heirloom. I mean, it was just a tool with a little sentimental value. But after it had been lost and then found, I know that my dad and the whole family treasured it just a little more. He didn't treasure any of the other memoirs less, you know. He didn't treasure Carl Roy's scout uniform that was in the cedar chest less. He didn't even put the axe in the cedar chest with it. But that memoir now meant more to him than it had before. The most beautiful thing is that when we come back to God, we don't come back as spoiled goods. We're not less valuable to him because we had left him. We're all the more valuable because we've been lost. He will only treasure you more if such a thing were possible.